Hey there, and welcome to the Total Potential Podcast. I'm Cole Birschbach, and I'm thrilled to be with you today. And I'm super grateful for you spending a little bit of your precious time with us. On our show today, we're lucky to be joined by Chris Gazdik, who is a therapist and an author and a podcast host. His book, Through a Therapist's Eyes, Re-Understanding Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self, is out now. And he also hosts the Through a Therapist's Eyes podcast, which is awesome. I would highly recommend checking it out. And I had the joy of being on with him last week. So I'm excited we got to talk more about parenting and family. But today, Chris and I are going to talk a little bit more about marriage, and I'm super excited for it. So thanks, Chris, so much for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. It's pretty fun I always like to point out being on other shows is so much easier on me. I don't have to plan. I don't have to prep. I don't have to monitor the time. I don't have to do anything else.
Yeah, you just get to share your expertise, which you have a lot of. Chris has been a therapist for over 20 years. So I'm sure, seen many, many interesting things walk through his door. And today we're going to get to touch on some of the interesting nuances that show up in marriage. But before we get there, Chris, tell us a little bit about your background, who you are, where you came from, all that good kind of stuff.
Well, your audience can't see the background, but I like to say I'm a proud mountaineer. Got a big WVU flag in my background there. So I'm from West Virginia. Been in North Carolina for God forever. My kids were born and raised North Carolinians. But yeah, I have. I've been doing this unbelievably almost. I mean, pretty soon I'm gonna have to start saying 3 decades. Like I feel old when I say that. It's terrible, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I'm very passionate about mental health and substance abuse services, everything that goes in and out with that. There's so much that we deal with, every day in our lives that I've really enjoyed launching the Through a Therapist's Eyes podcast because I've been doing it individually with people, and I began to find themes that kind of played out, and so to scale that up and to get broader, so to help people understand those things is kind of what the Through a Therapist's Eyes platform is kind of all about. But yeah, but a little bit about me. I mean, I like being outdoors. I like been hiking a good bit. Not much lately. I'm getting back into it. I like kayaking and West Virginia things.
Yeah, the great outdoors. I love it.
The hills of West Virginia.
Yeah. Whatever prompted you to step into therapy? Like, how did that become an interest or an area of passion for you to serve people in that way?
Oh, that's a good question. The joke that's not really a joke, we all get into it to figure our own crap out. That's a bit of the truth. I mean, I like to think of it as really a byproduct of, anytime you spend so much time doing what you do, you get, if you're a plumber, you learn how to plumb your house really well and all. So we get to plumb our mind in that
Yeah.
way. The phrase that just occurred to me, but actually it's cool because I was one of those weird kids that actually in high school, like I took an abnormal psych class in psychology. I'm like, dude, I think I could do that. I think it's interesting to me. And then we went through a family divorce and everything. And then my mom got into doing social work. So I always thought I'd be a psychologist. And she did that. I learned the industry a little bit and decided to go to social work school. And kind of just really like you remember these, I'm going to date myself. You remember these shows, Growing Pains?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, right. Like I loved it. So all the way back in high school, I thought that'd be really cool to just really kind of reach out and help people. So I don't know, one of those weird high school things that came into a whole life's passion.
Yeah. How cool is that? And what prompted you to get into podcasting and then writing your book?
Yeah, well, that's the God, that's my new baby. You know, it's like I said in the introduction of the book. I've done therapy for a while, and I began to kind of see similar things from person to person, and then I began to say some of the same things over and over again. I found creative ways to say them. So I actually started thinking, yeah, I should write some of these things down. And in my mind, I created actually this thing like 15 years ago.
Mm,
But I never got into doing it because I figured like, yeah, I need to get some credibility. I need to do this for a little while. I really need to ground this thing in, to an understanding of people where, you know, eventually the book was always an idea. And then I just met my buddy Craig, and he started turning me on to this whole different world, with masterminds. And I just looked at him one day. He confirmed. I didn't realize if it was his idea or my idea. I just looked at him. I was like, dude, we need to do a podcast. And like we just did. And so off and running we went, and I just found it. I find it really, really cool because, like I said, there's so many things that we're dealing with when it comes to anxiety and insecurities and depression and marriage and substance abuse that people are dealing with all around their lives. And so to do that platform, I mean, I really want to grow it out. Check it out, because I don't think there's anybody that you wouldn't find content on there that impacts you on a daily reality, in a daily reality way.
Yeah. And if it's not you, people that you love and care about and indirectly maybe are having experience with or want to reach out and help somebody, I would absolutely, definitely check out the podcast. So many interesting topics there. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So as you started spending more time with individuals in therapy and couples in therapy, what were some of the patterns that you saw emerge?
Oh gosh.
Probably a few.
Yeah, a few. I mean, first of all, I'll tell you what comes to my mind when you say that. You think people are so fascinated when they find out what I do. And they always ask, oh, you're a therapist. And they say, oh, okay, you do physical therapy. And I'm like, no. That's why I introduced it the way I did, right? Mental health and substance abuse therapy, because otherwise people are thinking other things. And I was working, I'm not going to say her name, maybe never hear this, but something always stuck in my head that looking back now kind of bothers me. You gotta understand, I was working in a mental health center, and it's pretty severely and persistently mentally ill people. SPMI population is what we used to call it. These are people that are in your state institutions, and they've struggled with severe bipolar and schizophrenia, and we used to call it dual diagnosis with substance use disorders and everything then. And we did a lot of good work for our people that really needed ground level, bottom level support in their life with really dramatic things. So anyway, water cooler conversations going on one day, and this lady said, yeah, well, we're working with people, and we're not working with what she called the worried well. Like, Cole, you and I
worried well
are what she would call the worried well. And I didn't think about it so much at the time, but it stuck with me. And I transitioned out of the mental health care system and started doing, what you call private practice. It's more managed care insurance based therapy. And I'm looking around, I'm like, dude, these are my neighbors. This is totally me. I mean, we're all dealing with those things called insecurities and, patterns you ask. I mean, there are so many, with self-talk and the way that we criticize ourselves, and, the patterns with getting sad and down. I mean, you can call it depression, but, we all go through, grieving losses. And I just began to find that these quote unquote worried well folks, well, it's all of us. I mean, we're all dealing with things that really can put you on the mat,
Yeah.
And, and I enjoy helping people get up off the mat from all those patterns. I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Oh, it does. Yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying so much about that's going to stick with me now, the worried well.
Yeah, right. I mean,
because it's everyone, and we all have those insecurities or those patterns or those things that just keep like popping up and popping up throughout life. And some of them are more serious than others for sure. But those patterns are addressable and rectifiable. And that's where it gets really interesting and can change the whole trajectory of someone's life when that pattern can be, the shape of it can change.
Or even broken. Sometimes
Yeah.
you want to keep some of the things in place. Sometimes you need to actually break it and do something totally different. And sometimes you just need to tweak things. But that's what I like about Total Potential. I mean, talking to you the other day, which, by the way, actually we're recording this on June the 5th, and we went live. Cole, I forgot to email you.
Awesome. Perfect.
Shot around the world on Through a Therapist's Eyes. the show. What did we call it? Developing. I forgot the name.
Yeah, healthy family environment.
Developing a healthy family environment,
Yeah.
parenting with Nicole. Yeah. So and um, you know the I lost my train of thought. What was I
Yeah,
saying?
what you like
I had
so
a quick
much
thought.
about total potential.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll let you share it.
That's right. Absolutely. Because talking with you, it was neat the way that you pull in, your dietary practice, your coaching, which I know well with my ex co-host Craig. He's moved on, but he taught me so much about the unbeatable mind and the things that you're looking to build an individual up with total potential. That's why I even love the name of your show, because they really can be mended and managed.
Yeah.
But I like to say it has to be purposeful, make a purposeful point to mend and manage your mental health. How's that for a phrase?
Yeah, absolutely. A purposeful point. I couldn't agree more with that. It's not changing just to change.
Right.
It's changing because there's a directionality to it, which is so important.
Or feeling stuck, like, we did a show on why change is so hard. People, we get into our ruts, we get into our accustomed routines. And I mean, a lot of times they're not working for us, and we got to figure out, like, how can we get to our total potential? I love your
Yeah.
name, Jeff.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks.
I do.
We call that the hamster wheel. It's like you're
Hmm.
in the hamster wheel, you got to get off the hamster wheel before you can really start to, make some changes. So we've used a certain word a few times, and I want to go there because I think that it's going to be such an interesting conversation today, which is insecurities. And I think it's safe to say that any married person, we have our own past, our own ideas, our own emotionality that we bring into the marriage. And without fail, like at some point, our insecurities in that relationship are going to show up. But what are the common insecurities that you see that you address in therapy?
Got you. With the marriage factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you checked out the emotion focused therapy, right?
Yes.
You were checking that out. I think we talked off the mics. So, okay, let me give you the elevator version is what I call it, with this guy who, well, let me back up. So I actually feel like I did a better than average job of doing marriage counseling early in my career.
Sure.
And the reason for that is because I would look at the patterns, the foundational patterns. Couples would come in to my office, and they'd be like, look, inevitably, they're always, a lot of times, we need better communication. And so I would look at, okay, well, we have these flashpoints, marriage flashpoints, financial issues, parenting, extended family, these types of things that we'll get into chronic fights about.
Mm-hmm.
But I would look at more, what are the foundational patterns, right? And I would get onto that level, and that made the marital work a lot more effective. But I feel like I was kind of missing the point when it got right down to, like, what are the foundational patterns that are a little bit more universal than I would have thought. I would have previously thought, like you said, our family culture, the experiences that we've had in life, the learning that we had, the modeling that we experienced, these are all a part of it. But there's this guy, his name's John Gottman.
Yes.
Remember me talking about John Gottman?
Yes.
Dude, this guy nailed it. He really, and it was interesting, not to say that our industry doesn't have a lot of science, but he was so fascinating because he just took, like, thousands of couples, and he just observed them. I think he called it the love tank. If you look at his,
the love lab, I think,
the love
maybe.
lab. You're
Yeah.
right. Thank you. I always call it the tank. I don't know why. But you're exactly right. So he just had these people in his love lab, and he wired them up. He measured their heart rates and their sweaty palms and their blood pressure and tear ducts, and just observed how people are connecting. And so he identified the two main insecurities that you just set me up for. And he said that people tend to operate from either abandonment or engulfment. And these abandonment folks, which we generally know what it is, being left alone or kind of feeling not important and that type of thing, or engulfment. And that was a weird insecurity, Cole. I had to actually look it up. I'm like, what is engulfment? How does that work? And what I found is, when you're engulfed by flames or engulfed by water, you're consumed, it comes and washes over you and controls you. And so that's a terrifying reality. And so is abandonment. But you choose one primary insecurity, and the abandonment people will develop a whole set of behaviors that are pursuing in nature. And the engulfment people will develop a whole set of behaviors that are withdrawing in nature. And so that's the way you get into these crazy cycles that are just chronic from the beginning of day one, all the way through a 50-year marriage. You'll have these. Now, obviously, you have three combinations I like to point out. 2 people from engulfment, 2 people from abandonment, right? 2 people from engulfment that are both like in their own worlds. I'd love to tell a story about how I came across that one.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Can you? I mean, it's crazy. Or 2 people crashing into each other constantly. And I see that a little bit more often, but overwhelmingly majority of the time, you got one person kicking into pursuing, trying to develop emotional safety by being close, which is overwhelming, and the other withdrawing, trying to create emotional safety by pulling back and creating space and being more internalized and shut down.
So I have to share this because I shared this with Chris off mic, but it just was so funny. So the first time I had a chance to hear Chris speak about this, I was sitting next to my husband. My husband was kind of busy doing his own thing. He didn't really hear what I was listening to. But all of a sudden, I'm laying on the kitchen counter laughing my you-know-what off because I looked at him and I'm like, oh my God, I'm abandonment and you're engulfment. And so I tell him about it and he starts laughing too. He's like, oh my God, that's totally what we are.
It is, man. And I do in therapy sessions, I'll do that little elevator version to introduce the idea, and you just see their wheels just spinning, Cole. It's trippy because we all are experiencing that on some level or not, really.
Yeah. Can you give an example of like a real life situation, or maybe even a couple to remain nameless, who's walked into your office and you're like, okay, let's part and parcel this off. I hear you saying this experience, but I also hear the undertones of this other thing. Can you think of an example like that?
Yeah, I'll give you the stock example that I'll give the same, couples in therapy session, and my mind can wander around maybe and maybe apply it even further. But I really do hear that all the time. Couples will come in. I'll hear people say all the time, we don't communicate. We don't communicate well. Like, our problem is communication. And what I'll explain, and I'll launch probably into the elevator version that I just gave you in the quick and dirty. And then I'll make this statement like, look, couples, you remember, Cole, getting married and, developing plans for a wedding ceremony and the complicated decisions that you've got going in on that. And even when you're dating, the life planning, and you've been married 5 years, is it time to have a kid? Well, let's factor these finances, and let's just break it down to creating the vacation plan. I mean, how complicated is it to set up a trip to, Myrtle Beach? Communication's not the problem because you do it over and over again. But when you get triggered, when you get in that moment and you get all washed over with your insecurities, now in that state, you can't talk about whether you're going to have Coke or Pepsi from the grocery store. It's impossible because all this stuff starts firing off and you're feeling unimportant and feeling like you're all alone and whatever. That's us, Cole. That's you and I, because we're on the abandonment side. I'm on your team. Or you're trying to control me, or you're always wanting to make the decisions and you never listen to me. I'm going to shut down. I mean, that's them, right? The engulfment camp. And so that plays out whether, you're talking about whatever fights come up, that's inevitably, almost universally, and 100% of the time, almost on some level, when you get triggered in the mix.
It's so fascinating. What has been your experience around like how these patterns develop? If I'm abandonment, is that something I've always had, like something I was conditioned in some way as a child, or is that something that develops over time? Like, what are some of the tendencies that even create these underlying insecurities?
In a word, I have no idea. It's something that's fun to play around with. I like to say people, when I'm doing an initial therapy appointment, I'll say, I like to focus on how life is, how you want life to be. And I know you do a lot of this in your coaching, right? Like we're focusing on how to move to where we want to be and how we want things to be. And so in the therapy world, we definitely look at a lot of the things from long ago that create barriers.
Mm.
They block us, or they misdirect us, or they confuse us, or they make us fearful, or whatever. There are a lot of those things. Kids come out of a family system, and one sibling is abandonment, the other is engulfment. I have no idea. I truly see my older kid as engulfment and my younger kid as abandonment. I something clicks somewhere, probably very early on. Little psychology fact is that like 80%, I was going to test you, but I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I was going to say, Cole, at what point do you think 80% of our personality is developed? I guess I will.
I'm going to say before the age of 7.
Right. Like 2.
Yeah.
Right. We're so young. So I don't know if there's genetic, biological realities that are there. It's fun to meander about talking about. But what I've landed on is I call it layering. So I call it the razor's edge. Whenever you kind of get born or whatever, you kind of fall on one side or the other, and then you roll to extremes. And so however far you go, idealized would be right in the middle at 50, but that had to be Jesus himself when he walked there.
Yeah.
No human being is that emotionally healthy, right? And so the life events create a layering, and layer after layer after layer. What you're fearful of, you notice, you see. What you're fearful of, really what you're terrified about, abandonment or engulfment, you'll find over and over and over again. And so, just getting stood up in high school might be an example. Well, an abandonment person's going to experience that. See, I'm all alone. They left me. That's clear confirmation. Or an engulfment person might experience that same experience by saying, see, they're controlling the situation. They talked to me and they dated me and they're just being mean to me. And I'm being manipulated here. See the difference?
Yeah.
I have no idea why that difference is experienced either way, but life experiences layer upon layer create sometimes a very strong set of behaviors.
Yeah. I love that point, that layering. I almost can, like, in my mind's eye, imagine, like the life experience that as it lays on top of each other. So let's say, first of all, I want to know what the extremes look like. So that's abandonment and engulfment together. What about abandonment and abandonment? That's hard to say back to back.
Abandonment and abandonment. Yeah. Chaos.
Interesting.
Chaos. I feel like those I've wondered, I like to think things, sort of out of the box and almost, sort of theoretically oriented. We used to call a type of relationship, I'm sure many people still do, a certain type of relationship would be a high conflict relationship. And I think Gottman actually talks about that, where there's just lots of conflict, lots of back and forth. And it's funny. This is a new thought. You've stimulated a new area of thinking, Cole. That's what I like talking about this stuff, especially on podcasts, right? You just explore wherever you go, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it that way. You just created a new thought for me. I'm thinking about, because the way you put it, right? The extremes. What are the more severe abandonment with abandonment relationships like? Gosh, I don't know if you can have that. That would be, because where you initially went, where my mind initially went is, an engulfment person will pair percentage wise on a scale, like more significant engulfment people will join relationships with more significant abandonment people.
Okay, so if the scale was like this, they're proportionately kind of even from the middle point.
Right. If
Okay.
50 is the idealized person, then a 70 engulfment would be pretty far. You'd get with a 30 abandonment person.
Got it.
And honestly, what that looks like to me is like domestic violence.
Oh, really?
Okay, right. When you get a 90 with a 10 or something like that, you've got somebody that's really shut down, really in their own world, just trying to get through the day, surviving, and alone in their mind, very internalized,
Mm,
coupled with the domestic violence person who's pretty external with their emotions, pretty overrunning people, pretty domineering, and severely injured in their heart by being terrified and feeling completely alone. So they will squash their partner, unfortunately,
mm,
because they have to be close. And the engulfment person can't really, you know, get out of that because they're very internalized, right? So I don't know that it's very common, if ever, like at all, for two really, really shut down people to be together, like 290
yeah.
engulfment people. Wow, what?
It would be like roommates, I'm imagining, like people
It,
who just almost like don't have anything to do
right.
with one another.
And
Interesting.
even more terrifying to imagine two people that are severely abandonment, right? You imagine a domestic violence perpetrator married to a domestic violence perpetrator? Like, that
No.
would be tough.
Yeah. I'm also imagining people, if two abandonment people were in the same in a relationship together, I'm imagining the like nonstop volume of conversation that would be
Yeah, absolutely.
happening.
Be a lot of thoughts shared back and forth, right?
Yeah. Like sensory overload on the ears is what I'm imagining.
Very sensory overloaded. Yeah, it would just be a lot of bickering and a lot of, a love fest when it's going well, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, by the way, it stands to point out, if you'll forgive me jumping to another kind of thing that pops in my mind with our conversation. These are not bad things.
Right.
Can we make that point?
Right.
I mean, the behaviors that we begin to get into. Listen, my wife has definitely helped me understand just to learn how to shut up. Right? Because you can't be dealing with problems and emotions all the time. You got to be able to relax, man, and just chill out and let things go. Like, don't be so worked up all the time.
Yeah.
You know, because she just doesn't have to do that all the time.
Right.
I'd like to say I've helped her. I'm sure that I haven't, but I've urged her anyway. Like, let's talk about this. Let's get
Yeah.
this out on the table. Let's engage. And so, abandonment people are going to get things done. They're going to talk.
Yeah.
But engulfment people are going to be able to be like, I feel like my wife's one of the easiest people to talk to because she's just laid back, man. They're not hot under the collar. They're really relaxed, and you can talk to them. They will listen.
Yeah. Well, I like what you're bringing up too, which is that even though these patterns, there's probably aspects of them we would like to improve upon, but the fact of the matter is that in that pairing, there's still a lot to learn and share because of that underlying pattern. And so it's not to say that the pattern itself is a detriment, rather that it has both its, positive aspects and its aspects that, maybe we could spend some time navigating a little bit more.
Absolutely. Look, the sweet spot is in the middle where everyone really wants all of the same thing. We all get married and we all have partners for a reason. We want that safe space. I call it the golden egg of marriage, right? Like the safe space that we can find connection in where we both feel emotionally safe. It's elusive. It's difficult to create sometimes. And when you do, it goes away, but you work to manage the patterns to get there as much as possible.
Yeah. What are some of the more effective ways that people can create that emotional security and safety so that whatever work needs to be done is available to them?
Okay, yeah, well, go to therapy.
Step
Actually,
number one.
especially, to get help as quickly as possible from an objective third party really does help. Listen, one of the things I think it was Craig that turned me on to, the millennials, they get ripped on, they get crashed down on. Do you know what they have done to the divorce rate?
they have a totally different picture. They're dropping
Yeah.
it a lot.
Yeah. It's been like 50, 55% like forever. And they came along and they get married and they get a little bit sideways and they're like, yo, well, we got to figure this out. Let's slow back. Let's take a couple steps back. And they come into therapy and they start talking, or a preacher, or therapy is not
Yeah,
the only way to go, but they start figuring it out. So as early on as you can catch this stuff is probably, as with most medical things, right? The earlier you catch something, the
sure.
better the prognosis. That's probably true. So that's really the first thing that comes to my mind. But along that, if you journey into like, the reality of beginning to understand your partner's tendencies, if you understand that when you're into something and your partner has a tendency to shut down or to withdraw, they're not doing that about you.
Mm,
They're doing that about their own internal reality. So understand that. Keyword, don't take it personally, and try to relax so that you're not chasing.
mm,
Conversely, like if you understand your partner tends to just get worked up and feels very unsafe, and they need to talk about it, and that's not really about you either. That's just about their own reality, and to not take that personally, then you can kind of meet in the middle.
mm.
Get a balance together. It's really hard to do when you're in a terrified state, though.
Right. What? Yeah, absolutely. It is hard
Right?
to do in a terrified state.
I think I just saw your wheels turning. Like, I know last week I was ready to tear his head off. And
Well, I mean, there's just so many important points that you bring up, and I'm going to kind of go through and hash a couple of them out, because you mentioned a couple of like in what you were just explained, some of the identifiable characteristics of when somebody might be in a space of either engulfment or abandonment. So can you maybe both for engulfment and abandonment, just a couple of the kind of classic presentations when somebody's in that state?
one of the handouts that I pull out very often, as you were talking, I figured out where you're going. And I pull this out. It's actually a colleague of mine, Jeff Shook, created this. And he gave it to me years ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this just nails it. So these things that I'm about to read to you, set number 1 and set number 2, just like scream off the page. And I will hear them in arguments. I'll hear myself saying some of these things, or or even worse, thinking some of these things, right? So see if you can figure out which one's abandonment and which one's engulfment.
Okay.
So set number 1 is, I can't count on you. You're not there for me. I feel all alone. I fear that you're going to leave me. Or it seems like what I need isn't important to you. Seems like what I want isn't important to you. Who does that sound like?
Abandonment?
Of course, that's
Yeah.
you and me,
Yeah.
right? Or you jump over to the other side, set number 2, right? I fear that if I get too close, you're going to criticize me, or you're going to control me. I feel like I need my space. Oh gosh, you're too much. I feel like I could lose myself in this relationship, or you're far more in control and you're trying to get more control of this relationship. And I feel overwhelmed by your needs. I feel overwhelmed by your reactions and your emotions. Who does that sound like?
Yeah, the engulfment. Yeah.
It's too much. I got to
Too
back off.
much.
You're too much. And the abandonment person saying, well, you don't do anything. You don't tell me anything.
Yeah.
And it just goes back and forth.
Yeah. It's really an interesting. So the thing that I keep thinking about as you're describing some of the qualities of these different insecurities are, and the reason I think I laughed so hard when I heard this the first time was because at baseline, someone like myself, I'm a super independent person and have been my whole life. Like, I like alone time.
Yeah.
I'm a do-it-yourselfer, no problem. And so it was really like an out of the box thought to even think like, what? I'm abandonment? Like,
Right.
I can hang out alone all the time.
Oh yeah.
And so I think it's a really interesting nuance that it's not necessarily um, just the personality of the individual. It's like in the relationship. It's like just in the connection piece. And that's so interesting.
It's when you're triggered,
Yeah.
right? It's when you're worked up. When you're not in an insecure state, sure, you can go and do whatever. And this is why it's interesting. This isn't a point that you ask about yet, but it drives me nuts when people talk on relationship stuff. A lot of times in religious circles, for instance, in church settings, they'll go gender this and gender that.
Hmm.
Hey, listen, men are different than women. I get it, for sure. But when it comes to the way that we feel insecurities, the human experience doesn't really have as much gender difference.
Right.
When a dude is depressed, they will experience unmotivated, not energetic, feeling sad. They will get tearful. They will feel stuck in a rut. These are the symptoms of depression.
Right.
Man doesn't get depressed different than a woman, really.
Right.
So in the context of your relationship, a dude is going to want to go and produce things. We're told to, go kill the cow and drag it home, whatever, you know. So there's gender, but in the insecurity state, when you get worked up in a hot spot, there's really not a gender orientation here. And a lot of people get confused about that because it's in like exactly like you just pinpointed it, Cole. It's right in that connection,
Yeah.
in that space where you're trying to connect. That's where this stuff blows up.
Yeah. And emotions, I mean, I always think it's so weird that emotions get put into genders because like it's human to have a breadth of emotions, and the more of them that we can have and experience and understand from a point of awareness, probably the better off we are. So if we could
Okay.
just X the whole gender component, that would probably be really effective for a lot of people.
In the emotional realm, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, because women are supposed to be the emotional providers for a family, and you know much better than I, Cole. I mean, when sometimes women have postpartum depression, right? They're not wanting to connect with the baby, and it's like, I'm not doing my job with this baby. Well, you have emotions that are raging.
Yeah.
Guys we're supposed to be tough, strong, broad shoulders, stick out your chest, we're tough. Well, not when you're insecure from abandonment, trying to freak out and deal with the terror of being alone or being
Right.
unimportant. It
Right.
just, yeah, I can go on and on about that for sure.
Another important point I want to highlight, and this is something that comes up a ton in unbeatable mind coaching as well, so I'm interested to hear it from your perspective. So these insecurities surface in a state of being triggered, and I think for the vast majority of us, we're fairly unaware, except for like the big ticket items, we're fairly unaware of what triggers us. So
Yeah.
how do we start to cultivate some recognition around like, oh, that happened. Okay, I know like my inclination is to respond this way, but like let me create some space. Like, how do you start to do that work? That's big work.
It really is big work, Cole. I mean, we have our task in front of us for sure in how we coach with people, and I mean that's where the rubber meets the road, like an old friend of mine like to say. You're really, I ask the people that I'm working with to, to avert their attention. Whether you said early on working with marriage couples, or I do this a lot in individual counseling as well with people. I mean, it's averting your gaze and your focus on other people in the outside world that we perceive doing this to us,
Hmm.
to ourselves, right? Averting that attention and direction to that which we cannot control outside of us, to that inside of us. Why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling? Let's just stop there, right?
Hmm.
How often do we ask ourselves that question?
Not
And then,
often enough.
right? But and I love the way that you kind of just alluded to, these are sometimes those quiet moments as well. Your husband might come home from a workout and you've been working all day, and you know you've got a meal prepared, and they kind of walk in and, hey, hi, I'm going upstairs for a little bit, and they have no idea that anything's going on, but you're just like, I am so blown off right now. I feel like I just got kicked to the curb.
Hmm.
Once again, you don't care about anything that I've done. I've got this whole meal set up, whatever, and stop. Like, what am I saying to myself? Why is this going on? Why am I feeling, and here's a key, energy about it?
Mm.
So I challenge you in the listening audience, to think about that. Like, when I feel energy, when I feel worked up in some way, something's up. And if you got a high level of energy on something really got triggered. What the heck is that? And that begins a journey, of 1,000 steps with that one step, as they say.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge take home point, I think, which is just that to almost not even label the emotion or right out of the gate, right? It's important to recognize the emotions we feel, but I love the fact that you're using the word energy. Like, I just feel something. Where did that come from? What's behind that? Yeah.
Yeah. I remember, listen, I've screwed this up many, many times, which please don't put us on the pedestal. But I did have one good moment. I remember it. I think it fits here. I want to share it. Like, I came home one day and, the kids were little and the kitchen was a wreck. No one greeted me. I walked in the door. It was like, do I have a family? Like, I don't know what was going on with me. And I was just all sourpussy with it. And I just looked around the kitchen like, dude, I guess I'll clean the kitchen up, like, this is ridiculous. And then it dawned on me, like, okay, my cleaning standards are up here. My wife's are like way up there. I am not that tidy. I don't worry about things like that. I should have said my cleaning standards are down here.
It's actually, okay. Why not frame it positively?
Yeah, right. I know. I misspoke. My cleaning standards suck sometimes. So, but I looked at the counter and I saw all the crumbs on there and I thought, wait a minute, this has got to be driving her way more nuts than it's driving me nuts. Why am I upset right now? Like, that was a moment that I have no idea where it came from, but it set me straight. Like, this is a you thing. Like, there's no reason to be feeling the way that you're feeling. So it was a good moment for me.
Yeah. I'm just going to throw in there really quickly. Like, these are the moments where I love to use breath and breathing because it just so quickly can, like, okay, even 1 or 2 inhales, exhales. It's like, oh, wow. Like, my body now can de-stress a little bit and, like, actually pay attention to what's going on instead of just, like you said, like running off that initial energy hit and just like off to the races.
Coach Cole comes out. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And you know what? You couldn't be more correct, honestly. It's something I probably don't do in my practice enough with people is, this is the time to step out onto the deck, stretch, move your muscles probably is a good, like, you talk a lot about movement, don't you? Mm-hmm. And that does a lot. Think about it. When you get all triggered and you're all emotionally upset and you're feeling that energy, cortisol is shooting through your body.
Just racing.
Right? Your amygdala has fired off like you're going to die. And you've got to fight and kill something or flee and run like a deer. Like, it is going to happen. You're going to die. And the adrenaline is racing. And this is a state that people can pick up a car with.
Yeah, right.
Back to that problem with communication. How well do you think you're going to talk about when you're ready to kill something?
Right.
It is not going to happen.
Right.
So yeah, go stretch. This is the time to take 2, 3 very large breaths. That physiologically changes your brain.
Right.
Right. That's a powerful thing you can do in the moment. So I love the point. It's something I should work with more.
As a yoga teacher, it's always on my mind. So I've been well trained in that regard.
Perfect.
What about, okay, so this is it. We've been talking about this in the context of a marriage. What about when you think about this in the larger scale of the family? So let's even just remove what you identify yourself as within these 2 insecurity buckets, I guess I'll call them. Remove what you see yourself as. Like, if you notice that your children fall into one of these buckets, for instance, management of that? Any thoughts around that? Because that seems like a real fertile ground for like really supporting a child as they might dip in and out of these insecurities.
I think so. Absolutely. If you listen to this show, you should really listen to the one that you and I did on Through a Therapist's Eyes, because you didn't mention it, but we actually kind of spun these together, I think, in kind of a creative way, right?
Yeah.
On our show, we talked about a lot of this topic with the kids. And I hope my guys are listening to this now with Through a Therapist's Eyes Tribe, because we're talking about how, I think they play together so easily, and you're right. You have that parent-child relationship. And if you're an abandonment type person with these characteristics of externalizing what you are thinking, with feeling like you're not heard, and I'm going to make sure you hear me, I'm going to run into you and make sure that we get these things dealt with. You have to learn life lessons, young man. You can just see the finger waggle in their face, right? And if they happen to be an engulfment kid, what do you think they've heard you say?
Mhm.
Nothing. You just ran over them and totally, destroyed your ability to teach that life lesson.
Hmm.
Conversely, if you have an engulfment style, you're probably like, okay, well, they're going to learn, let them struggle. And we do need to let them struggle. But further, I don't want to step on their toes. I just want to have peace. I just want the kid to get along, and, I'll pick up the wrapper for them and I won't confront them. And I'm just going to give them space.
Hmm.
That's a good strategy. You have to have a balance, but if the kid's running off the rails, man, you better confront them. You right? You can't
Right.
just sit back and think that they're gonna just get it. You have to engage, like sometimes engage intensely. So you see, there's that battle, right?
Yeah.
There's that balance.
And I'm just having a light bulb moment because I had recognized this pattern between my husband and I, but it absolutely plays out like in our parenting styles as well,
Right.
which is so interesting. I hadn't even
It's
extrapolated it to that at this point.
yeah.
Interesting.
And furthermore, unrelated, but this goes into the way that we relate to our families, extended families, and really the way that we go in with making friends and deal with friendship. This is a relationship thing, people. It's really about connection. Anybody that we attach to, it's just that it's loudest, when you get the energy with your spouse, right?
Yeah.
It's not so
Yeah.
loud with your, fun buddy that you just go golfing with. I'm not going to be worried about it.
Right. Right.
But if you're paying attention, you can see it operationally there.
Oh, absolutely.
Actually. Yeah, okay.
No doubt.
Seems like you have thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, for sure. It just, again, it's been a real light bulb for me to be like, wow, I'm this super independent person who, um, like I crave few close relationships, and past that, I'm like kind of okay, with
Yeah.
having more surface level, just like acquaintance relationships. But in those relationships that are close, like for sure this pattern exists. So just like
Mhm.
the recognition, and I'm really hoping for our listening audience that that is a huge takeaway, which is just to like understand which, as you called it, the razor's edge, like which side you kind of fall on. Because I think, knowledge is power, right? Like even just the knowingness of like, oh, that's so interesting, that is part of my pattern. It
Mhm.
gives us a whole new context with which we can, manage emotions and manage relationships, and maybe come in with a different um uh
Angle.
awareness, a different energy to the relationship.
I'm really passionate about helping people understand themselves. I don't know you when you come into my therapy office or when you're listening to my show, but I know patterns and I
Mm,
understand some ways that emotions flow around. And so, what I'm all about, with even the Through a Therapist's Eyes show in the book, right, like is figuring out the insights about what it is that you're dealing with that are just operational. If you just begin to develop that understanding and, like you say, awareness, like as a matter of fact, I think of many times over because I'm really passionate about therapy in the mental health and substance abuse field. What makes it work? Well, I think that helping someone develop insight is one thing that makes therapy work. How about that for a quote? Right?
Absolutely.
Therapists, listen out there. You can't go very far if you don't know this stuff is going on. People will go over and over and over again doing the same things and never really get out of the traps that your own behavior or quote unquote fears set up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the insight, the awareness, that's a real gift of the type of work that you do for sure.
Right.
Because it's amazing how just having the recognition of it is enough, not to completely change, but to like start down a path where you're like, oh, there it is. Interesting. Maybe I'd like to make a different decision there, you know?
And I loved your smile. And what you did is you just kind of said, oh, smile, eyes open. There it is.
Yeah.
If you develop that ability on any level, like, first of all, that's probably going to be after the effect. If you can get real time with that, stop it. You're in great shape. You're doing an amazing job. It's going to happen afterwards, particularly at first, to pay attention. But boy, when you get into it and you start noticing a little bit, hopefully, particularly before it becomes intense, you can ward a lot of these things off, insightfully so. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
good stuff.
Well, and I'm imagining, a couple in disagreement, somebody's been triggered and the argument has ensued and or disagreement, conversation, whatever is underway. And perhaps it's not like you're saying in the moment where you can make a change or change course, but if it can be, a couple hours later instead of a couple weeks later,
Or
and you
months
can revisit the conversation,
or
or a
years.
lifetime or a divorce later,
Right. Or divorce later, right?
right?
This stuff is all a part of that.
Yeah,
And back to your point where you broadening it out, your relationship with that whole family unit.
yeah.
Like, these things are firing back and forth with all members of that family unit. And being able to get those times together where you can come together as a unit, kind of understanding these tendencies. And here's another thought: respecting those
Mm,
differences and understandings. That's hard. I know it sounds simple, like, well, I respect my
yeah,
husband.
yeah.
Come on, right? But not when you're triggered.
Right. Well, and respecting their vulnerability, right? Because this technically, when I think about it, like for me, as I'm thinking about just even doing this work my own self, as my husband and I were having this conversation, I'm like, you know what? I'll be more careful with my words the next time because I see that for you, like just in this moment, I can see for you that that's too much.
Yeah.
And you can see for me that like I'm just asking you to show up a little bit more, or I'm just asking you to say something in response, or whatever it might be.
Would be good.
Yeah. And so just those little wiggles, bring you closer and allow that person to have that vulnerability and that exposure without it being like a further sinking into that pattern
Right.
is what I'm
I
imagining.
love your quote. I am gonna quote Miss Cole. Oh, I'm sorry. Which I just butchered it.
It's okay, Bershback. No one can say it. My maiden name was Taylor. It was so much easier.
Try Gazdik. Gazdik, tough one. No, the little wiggles.
Mm,
That is an awesome way to put it, because that's all we're trying to do here. We are not trying to overwhelm you by changing this whole pattern, nor do we want to change some of those patterns, because remember, they work.
right.
I like the phrase engulfment, insecurity based skill sets. Okay.
Hmm.
Abandonment, insecurity based skill sets, respectively, right? Because there's a lot that does work here. But those little wiggles, we're trying to wiggle out of this conundrum when you find it. I'm certainly going to quote you. Cool. The little wiggles. We're not talking about the wiggles on the cartoon. You remember
Right.
show
I
the
know. I'm
wiggles?
imagining like a cartoon a handout that now is going to your therapy
I hear
couples.
those wiggles in my nightmares. Those people singing. My kids are thankfully, well, actually, it'd be better than what they listen to now, but that's a whole other story. Way better than what they listen to now.
Oh man. Well, Chris, I just appreciate this conversation so much. I think this point of awareness is so helpful to not only couples, but like you're saying, as it expands out to the family dynamic and even friendship and, extended relationships. If somebody's interested in hearing more from you or finding out more, where can they check everything from you out?
All right. Well, it's easy to remember. I probably struggled with the name, through the eyes of a therapist is what people sometimes say. That's not correct. Shouldn't have even said that out loud. So it's through a therapist's eyes. And you just Google that, you'll find the book and the podcast. I'm really excited about the show that we do. And kind of am launching a little bit more moving in the future, maybe doing some online classes and stuff, some online things that, that you can tap into. We don't have any yet, but I mean, our show has a plethora of things to get in there and check out, whether it has to do with anxiety or depression or, you go to throughatherapist'seyes.com, you type this, there's a search bar, and you want to learn about substance abuse. I mean, the issues with that are just so profound in people's lives, whether it's your kid who has substance abuse issues. Oh my gosh, we've been so blessed, Cole, by having so many cool guests. There's this lady that talked about her son dealing with, with addiction issues and how she coped with that. I mean, some really cool things, trauma, police work, and the trauma that our men and women are struggling with. So I don't know. I just really get excited about these things. And so I guess to answer your question, throughatherapist'seyes.com.
Awesome. And what about social platforms?
Same. Yeah.
Same. Okay.
We're on Instagram and I don't know, Facebook and stuff. That's Neil's department. I can't stand it.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to include all that in the show notes so that listeners can find more about you and your book and the podcast. Absolutely recommend all of them. It's been such a pleasure to have this conversation and really like aha moment at our house. So
Well, Cole, thanks for having me. I love talking about it, and I appreciate what you do. Keep doing it.
awesome. Thanks so much, Chris.